This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Starting this Wednesday show is Roger McEowen, K-State and Washburn law professor, with information on the lesser prairie chicken rule. He also discusses two cases that represent the importance of handling family business with professionalism. Ray Flickner, owner and operator of Flickner Innovation Farm, Sarah Lancaster and Ron Graber, K-State specialist, continue the show with what will be at the upcoming Flickner Innovation Farm Field Day. Beef Cattle Institute's Brad White, Brian Lubbers, and Phillip Lancaster in today's show with their Ask the Experts segment. Today, they have a conversation about grazing programs. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and on this Wednesday, we start our show with some agricultural law information. And to share some of his knowledge, we have K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen. Roger, thanks for joining us once again.
Good to be with you, Shelby.
And Roger, for today's segment, we kind of had two different topics we wanted to talk about. The first one being a lesser prairie chicken rule, and the second one discussing how family farming and being in a family business can possibly create some issues and some recent cases that show that. And first, getting started now with what is that lesser prairie chicken rule?
Well, we've got a continuing controversy with respect to the lesser prairie chicken that's been going on for 30 years and has impacted Kansas producers for that length of time. And the most recent iteration of this goes back to late last year. It was close to Thanksgiving time last year when the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service finalized a rule that extended protections under the Endangered Species Act to the lesser prairie chicken by expanding their designated habitat territory. And so what the rule did was split that habitat into two regions, a northern region and a southern region. And the lesser prairie chicken is designated as endangered in the southern region, which is not of concern to Kansas. That's western Texas and eastern New Mexico. And it's threatened in the northern region, which is parts of western Kansas and western Oklahoma and some counties in the Texas Panhandle. And what this rule does is require landowners in those areas now that are in the designated habitat range in Kansas in that northern range, where the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has published range maps. Those landowners have to have a site-specific grazing plan that the federal government approves before they can run cattle on the property.
Why is this kind of making some producers not the happiest with this rule?
Well, primarily because it's going to increase their cost of their operations. It's going to lead to significant compliance costs, obviously, and costly alterations to their farming and ranching operations. And it'll end up barring a number of routine farming and ranching activities, including the maintenance of high-quality grasslands, which some of these ranchers in that area have established. And in fact, the ranches that are challenging this rule in court, seeking to set it aside, have already said, look, we have established high-quality grassland, and under this rule, the way it's going to be implemented with respect to us, we won't be able to continue to maintain that. We've already taken steps toward conservation and to establish these grasses, and this rule is going to actually have the perverse effect of preventing us from continuing to do that. And the ranchers that are also claiming in their challenge to the rule that it will restrict future land use planning decisions by prohibiting conversion of the native grasslands on their property out to other land uses, such as row crop agriculture. So in areas where you can't convert grassland to high-quality grassland, you want to be able to farm it, and they're saying we're not going to be able to do that. And then some of the counties in western Kansas have jumped in, and they've also asserted that this is going to have an undue burden economically on the counties. These are rural counties. These are not counties that have high population densities. But they've also said that in challenging that, in terms of the greater economic cost, that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service didn't follow the procedure to properly develop the rule. They failed to determine that the rule was necessary and advisable under the Endangered Species Act, didn't consider all of the relevant factors before finalizing the rule, went beyond their statutory authority in producing the rule, and didn't provide the required regulatory flexibility analysis under another federal law. And so they're trying to have the rule set aside and the matter sent back to the Fish and Wildlife Service so that they can write a new rule that's consistent with established procedure.
Is this currently still an ongoing case then?
Yeah, it's ongoing. We'll see. This isn't the final decision yet. This was just a court filing just a couple of weeks ago in federal district court in Kansas. We'll have to see what the court rules on this. And if they do rule in the rancher's favor and the county's favor, then that means the existing rule will be wiped out and it'll be sent back to the agency to develop a new rule.
And Roger, another topic we wanted to talk about today was farm businesses, specifically looking at farm family businesses and the importance of making sure everyone is on the same page and making sure it operates still as a business.
Yeah, a family farm or ranch is a great workplace. It's always great to work with family members, and you're the recipient and steward of a legacy that's going to stretch for generations. And there's a subset of farming operations that do plan to have the business continue in the family for subsequent generations, not just the immediate one, but on down into the future. And we have a number of those century farms and ranches in Kansas. So it can be a good job. And some would say it's the best job in the world. But on the other side of the coin, working with family can create a business culture that if you're not careful, it can threaten the effective functioning of the whole operation. And some of those potential problems are, if we just think of the practicalities here, if we're working with family members and you got a family member that's not really doing their job very well, it's difficult to impossible to fire a family member. It's not very easy to do that, and it creates a lot of tension. And also, family members typically aren't paid market wages, but they should be. We should always compensate labor on the farm at a market rate, and we tend not to do that with family members. And we also don't give them feedback. It's pretty difficult when your wife is working for you. I'll use my own example. My wife works for me in my private business and does the books and so forth. And I can just see the reaction I would get if I would say, you need to have an annual evaluation. No, that's not going to happen. So we don't have those things that happen when we have family farming operations. And that can cause serious problems if we're not careful. But we have to adopt practices that are common to non-family businesses, and that's the key point. That will help ensure the viability of a family farm or ranch, while at the same time allowing you to keep your benefits of working in agriculture with those that you love. And so that's the tough part of a family venture.
In a case that shows just kind of how confusing that was, one son was renting while another one was using grain bins, and things kind of got confusing and ended up going to court.
Yeah, we had a case out of Nebraska. It's kind of a modern-day Brady Bunch situation. We had a married couple with a blended family, not 6 children, but 12 that they raised on the farm. And 2 of their sons became farmers, and one of them rented the farm from his parents, and the other one used the grain bins on the farm without paying rent. Well, you let that kind of a situation fester for a long enough period of time, you're going to have one brother that gets upset with the other brother. And sure enough, after a number of years of no payment from one of the brothers, the parents and the brother sued the brother that hadn't been paying, the son/brother that hadn't been paying rent for unjust enrichment. It ends up in court. It's an absolute mess. And the court sorts out the damages, and there were damages that had to be paid. So you hate to see these family situations degrade into this, but this is just an example of not doing, with respect to a family member, what you would have done if it would have been a non-family member. You would have charged them rent for the use of the grain bin. And that favoritism caused problems. They ended up in court, parent suing child, brother suing brother, and it was an absolute mess.
Another case that was a mess was a daughter scamming her parents, and then those parents then having to deal with theft and taxes.
Oh, boy, this was a disaster of a case, and the judge even said, I don't like the result. This is a horrendous situation, but I'm stuck with what the law is. And what happened here is mom and dad had a pet food business, and they wanted to retire, so they retired, turned everything over to their daughter. Well, their daughter was a scammer, and had scammed other people and started scamming her parents. And long story short, she was able to have the parents deplete $1.1 million out of their retirement funds, and she got other money from them, a total of about $2 million. But the daughter, by the way, ended up in prison. She's got about 20 years for this. She got caught. But this was a tax case, and the parents were saying, well, wait a minute, this money was stolen from us. We shouldn't have to pay tax on the funds we took it out of our retirement plan. But the court agreed with the IRS and said, yeah, you do. You were the ones that actually took the distribution. She didn't forge your name to get the money directly out of your account. You took the distribution. That's the taxable event. And then the parent said, well, if we have to pay tax on this, we want to take a theft loss deduction. And this is the key point. A theft loss is deductible. There are rules that apply with respect to deducting theft losses. But a theft loss is deductible in the year it is discovered. They didn't discover this until 2019. And what Congress did, starting with 2018 through 2025, is they suspended the theft loss deduction rule. It's not there. And the only exception is if you are in a designated federal disaster area. So if you have a designation of a federal disaster area, you can get a theft loss deduction. Same thing for casualty loss. You can still claim a casualty loss if you're in a federally designated disaster area. And that applies to farmers and everybody. But obviously this couple wasn't. So they had to pay over $400,000 in tax on the funds they were scammed out of the retirement account, and then couldn't get a theft loss deduction. So the non-farm case, but the principle here is theft losses, casualty losses now are only deductible through 2025 if the loss occurs in a federally declared disaster area. Now, with a lot of our weather events for farmers and ranchers, we do get that designation. Theft is going to be different, and it's not as likely. In fact, it's probably unlikely that you'll have a federally declared disaster. Now, to the extent you recover insurance, you can't get a theft loss deduction. It's only beyond what insurance covers. But that's the current lay of the land on this, and it really burned this couple. They were down in Florida with respect to what their daughter did to them.
Roger, a lot of information today and sharing some important tips for people who might be in family farming operations. I appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you very much, Shelby.
That was K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen. I will link some of his resources in today's show notes, which you can find on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show now to discuss a field day that is coming up, and that field day is the Flickner Innovation Farm Field Day. And in to talk about it, we have Extension Watershed Specialist Ron Graber, owner-operator of Flickner Innovation Farm, Ray Flickner, and K-State Extension Weed Management Specialist Sarah Lancaster. And so, Flickner Innovation Farm Field Day, coming up very shortly here, August 10th. And at this field day, what's happening, Ray?
This actually is our third summer field day that we're going to have. We've had two others previously dealing with water issues, irrigation issues, and so forth. But the focus on this one is going to be in the weed technology side, trying to showcase some of the different technologies, cutting-edge items out there that we can use in terms of managing the weeds in the farming business.
What are some things you're excited to see there?
Well, as I tell Dr. Lancaster on numerous occasions that, we do know that weeds are going to be here forever. Our attempt is to try to manage them so that we can keep them under control. We're never going to eliminate that. I think the good book says that on numerous occasions that, that's what it is. So, and the reliance on herbicide that we've typically used, we're seeing, less and less success with that. And so we need to kind of find out what can we do new and different in terms of managing that. And that's one of the things we're going to try to showcase here on the field day. We've got a number of different new technologies showing up, including the See and Spray arrangement that basically has a camera, will identify the weeds as you're going through the field and spot spray them, which is amazing. We've actually done that on 3 different applications on the farm this year, and we will have a demonstration of that during the field day. But running at 12 miles an hour and have the ability for the camera to see the weed and spot it at that time is just really amazing to me. In addition to that, we're going to be bringing a K-State combine down from Hayes that has a weed seed destructor on the back end of the combine, which is to basically try to damage the weed seeds as it comes out the back end of the combine, make them non-viable. So we're going to do that. I know Dr. Lancaster has done some studies out west with the machine this wheat harvest on that, and we'll have some preliminary results on what we're seeing there.
Ray brings up some really great points, Shelby. What I would consider kind of big headliners for the field day would be the site-specific application. And so in this case, we're talking about the John Deere See and Spray technology, and then the ReadyCop seed destructor. So Ray referenced a student of mine, Alec Adam. He's actually doing some research looking at integrating those two things into a one farming operation. So kind of getting a systems approach. And I think one of the things that this field day is going to give us an opportunity to highlight is the fact that weed management, as Ray alluded to, really is management. We used to kid ourselves and say control, but it really is management, not control. It's a systems approach. So we're going to talk about everything from some cover crop research that's going on with some of my colleagues, and we're going to have a grad student talking about that. The two pieces of technology that Ray referenced and that we've already talked about. And then we've also got some other kind of non-chemical strategies. So we've got some weeding robots that are going to be there. And also my crew has worked with Dave Button out of the Great Bend area to collect some data looking at his device that he calls the row shaver. It's a non-chemical control option for weed escapes that can be useful in crops, especially like grain sorghum. I was just answering some emails this morning, Shelby, about controlling weeds in sorghum that was fairly mature, and that is definitely a challenge to do with herbicides. So I think it's a great opportunity for folks to come and, maybe these aren't things that everyone is going to be able to implement on their farm in 2024, but I think it's definitely the way the industry is going as we think about using less herbicides per acre and getting them where we want them. Autonomy, the robots, and thinking about autonomy. I think agriculture, as we think about labor shortages and things of that nature, autonomy is going to be a big role in weed management. And so as we think about dealing with labor shortages and needs for efficiency, autonomy is going to be a part of that. So I think seeing some robots in action will be a very important piece of this too.
Yeah, and I might add from a water quality standpoint, we've been trying to address some needs there and in terms with our proximity of the farm to the city of Wichita and concerns with specifically atrazine use. And, any of these new technologies or management schemes that we can employ to reduce the risk of atrazine leaving field and maybe not have to rely on it at all benefits not only the farmer producer from the standpoint of economics, but also helps maintain or improve our water quality for our folks downstream.
And this field day definitely seems to focus a lot on how do people and producers manage their weeds. However, are there other topics that are kind of also going to be covered?
Yeah, Shelby, we're going to spend some time. We have Dr. Presley coming out, and we're going to spend some time in a soil pit that we're going to dig on the farm there. Did that 2 years ago, and I had quite an interest, the ability to get down in the pit and see the different layers of the soil structure is of real interest. Additionally, we've got a study going on there related to the actual use of cover crops, and got a graduate student that's going to be talking a bit about the impact of cover crops as it relates to weed suppression. And we are seeing some definite variations. We have strips there that have had cover right next to a strip that doesn't have cover, and we can tell the weed difference. But we can also tell there's a major difference in terms of use of the soil moisture and the plant health. What you find out is what you end up with from a weed suppression standpoint may not necessarily be the best thing when it gets to be 105 for a week or two with no rain. And we're seeing some definite variations as it relates to crop health there.
Talked a lot about different technologies that are going to be there, and you've mentioned cover crops. And so is there some cool technology relating to cover crops that's going to be there?
Yeah, Shelby. One of the things we're going to attempt to have there, and we're still working on getting that firmed up, but there is a interseeder rig, Montag Hagee interseeder that basically goes through the field, blows the cover crop in standing corn during the growing season, like this time of the year, and then the cover starts to grow while the corn matures, and then when the corn is harvested, the cover's already actively growing. We will have one of those there. We're still debating or trying to get things figured out whether or not we will be able to actually run the rig in the corn, but that is the intent, that hopefully we can actually do a demonstration in standing corn of how that works.
And Ray, as a Kansas producer, what does this Innovation Field Day mean for you, but then also your counterparts?
My intent with the field day when we started this was the idea that, can we do things different that move the needle, that we can make things better? My intent, and the farm has been in the family since 1874, a long history there. And, my forefathers, when they homesteaded that, they used the plow, and they had to use the plow because that's the way they made the living, because if they didn't plow it up, they would not survive. But we do know that there's things we can do now with technology that leaves the farm, leaves the soil in a much better shape than what it was before. And that's been my intent from day one, is what can I do to leave the farm better than what I found it.
And Sarah, as a scientist, why are you excited about this Flickner Innovation Farm Field Day?
I think it's amazing to be able to put some of our research ideas into practice on a functioning farm, Shelby, and just the opportunity to interact with the folks that are going to come see. I would encourage, farmers and folks in the industry, if you're struggling with weeds, if you think you want to try something new, but you're not sure what, if you've heard a little bit about some of these technologies, but have questions, or maybe you're a little bit skeptical, I think it's going to be a great opportunity for me as a scientist to interact with farmers, a big swath of farmers, and get some of that feedback and some of those great ideas for the next round of research projects that we need to think about.
Ron, you've contributed also a lot to helping make this field day happen. And so what makes you excited about it, and how can people find out more information?
I'm excited because of the number of things going on there. And we've talked a lot about weed management and soil health today, but, there's a lot of irrigation kinds of technologies. And gosh, if you think about all of the partnerships that we've been able to form just since 2019, we've got about 20 different either private industry or producer groups or agencies that are all actively engaged as partners in things that we've got going on there. I think we've got somewhere between 8 and 10 K-State researchers that have projects going on there. There's about that many scientific publications that have been published that have came out of there just since 2019 when we started. So there's really a lot of really, really cool things going on there. And I think there's something for almost every farmer producer that's going on there that they can learn. And maybe we're not highlighting it this year, but certainly they can learn about it and find out about that. And so, I need to mention one of our partners in particular is the City of Wichita has been very actively involved in helping fund some of the education, and they'll be helping with the field day as well. And so if folks are interested in coming, we'd like to hear from you ahead of time. There will be a noon meal included, and so we kind of need to have an idea so we can plan accordingly. So they can either email at kstatekcare@ksu.edu by email, or they can give me a call at 620-727-5665.
That was K-State Extension Watershed Specialist Ron Graber, and he was joined by owner-operator of Flickner Innovation Farm, Ray Flickner, and K-State Extension Weed Management Specialist Sarah Lancaster. I will link the resources that Ron mentioned in today's show notes on agtoday.net. The Flickner Innovation Farm Field Day is taking place west of Moundridge, Kansas on August 10th at 8:30 a.m. It is free to attend, but we do ask that you take the time to register so they can have a meal for you. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more ahead. We end this Wednesday show on Agriculture Today with the Beef Cattle Institute's Ask the Experts.
Hi, welcome to Beef Cattle Institute's Ask the Experts. I'm Brad White, joined today by two experts, Dr. Brian Lubbers and Dr. Phillip Lancaster. As always, if you have a question for us to answer, you can send it in to bci@ksu.edu. And based on their answers, each of these guys will get up to 10 points as we go through our listener question today. And the listener says, I've heard a lot about different grazing programs and trying to figure out what is best for my operation, a continuous or a more management-intensive type grazing. Phillip, I'm going to go to you first. How do I figure out the answer to that question?
Well, I think my personal opinion is that the more intensive grazing is better for your forage production, the soil health, and just productivity off the ranch. But it's also going to require some more inputs. It's going to require especially labor. But some data that I've seen from it's surveyed data that producers indicate that the more intensive grazing adds about 30 to 40 days of grazing to their grazing season. So that's quite a bit of winter feed savings there. So to offset that additional labor that you have to put into that.
Okay, so you've got some labor costs, but you've also got some benefits by having a longer grazing season. Put some specific numbers on there. So 6 points for Phillip to start out with.
I'll take the continuous grazing side as my preferred choice, and Phillip really answered why. I mean, it really comes down to the labor. So there's some other inputs like fencing and things like that, but the labor of checking the fencing, the labor of moving the cattle. The other thing about the rotational or intensive management grazing systems is water access, right? And so, for a lot of small cow-calf producers, which is the majority as far as numbers of producers, they may not have a large area with multiple water points of access. So when you get into things like having tanks that you're either putting wells to or hauling water to, I think for the vast majority of people, the continuous grazing system is going to be what they probably tilt towards. And the other thing is we often, and maybe this is tradition, which maybe isn't the best reason to do something, is, the summertime is the time we turn them out and do other things around the operation, right? Mechanical stuff, crops, whatever that might be. So
I think great point, though, Brian, on the costs associated with it. Labor is the one that Philip mentioned, but you also threw in fencing and water. And the water can be a big one, because if I have to add a well to make this plan work, or if I have to add new water, it's going to take a while to pay for that. So even those extra days that I get may be hard to justify. So 7 points for Brian. Philip, I'm going to go back to you, and I'm going to have you expand on what would you expect the time constraints to be specifically, since you brought up labor. So how much time is this going to take me? And you gave me an idea of that it's going to lengthen the grazing season. What about the quality of forage and pastures? So 2 questions.
So it's going to add time. I'm trying to remember some numbers, but some estimates of intensive grazing versus continuous grazing. I think you're looking at an additional 30% of labor or something like in that ballpark. Because even in continuous grazing, you still need to go check the cows periodically. You can't just let them go out there for 3 months and never see them during that time. And so you still have to go check them. You may have to provide summer protein supplementation later on in the summer anyway. So there is some labor already there. And then there is some improvement in forage quality, because when you graze off a plant, the regrowth is a higher quality, higher digestibility than the part that was grazed off. And so the regrowth is, and if you come back to regraze that soon enough, then what the cow is consuming is higher quality than what would be there otherwise. But that's a trade-off, because especially in our native species, regrazing them too soon can have a detrimental effect on plant survivability and stand persistence.
And because Philip gave a long answer for that one, he's going to end up actually having 8 points. Brian's got 6. Thanks for joining us today. As always, if you have a question, send it to bci@ksu.edu.
Once again, that was BCI experts Brad White, Brian Lubbers, and Phillip Lancaster. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.